Empress Vereth now struck the obsidian dais with her scepter, the resonant chimes slicing through the murmurs of the grand court like a blade through silk. Towering friezes of Thalari ancestors loomed above, their gilded eyes judging from shadowed alcoves, as every counselor, house lord, and military prefect snapped to rigid attention. "The Concordat endures," she declared, her voice a cascade of imperial steel. "And so we ratify the treaty forged in the Void War's ashes. The human envoy, Jonah Reyes, shall reside within these halls as diplomatic consort, binding our worlds in uneasy peace." A ripple of scaled hides and feathered crests stirred among the assembly, but Virith held her gaze forward, unyielding. Chief Counselor Ardek's mandibles clicked faintly from his perch on the high dais, a predator scenting weakness, but she ignored it, gesturing to the Herald of Rights. The ceremony must proceed flawlessly. One fracture in protocol, and the conservative houses would feast on the breach. The Herald unrolled the treaty scroll, its holographic seals flickering to life in Thalari script, and the crude angular runes of human standard. "By the blood oaths of old," he intoned, "Empress Virith Nal accepts the liaison of the human confederacy. Let the binding rite commence." Attendants wheeled forward the twin altars, one of polished void crystal for Thalari sovereignty, the other a loned human relic, a simple alloy pedestal etched with unfamiliar sigils, shipped from their frontier worlds at great haste. Jonah Reyes stepped into the light then, the human envoy cutting a figure both alien and disconcertingly precisely. Tall for his kind, with skin the color of sun-scorched earth, and eyes like polished obsidian, he wore the ceremonial robe she'd mandated. Thalari silk draped over his frame, though it hung awkwardly on shoulders broader than any courtier's. He moved without the hesitant shuffle she'd expected from off-world primitives, his posture mirroring a prefect's drill march. No tremor in his hands as he approached the altars. The herald raised the chalice of ratification nectar, a viscous elixir drawn from the deep vents of Thalara Prime, its fumes curling like spectral vows. "Consort Reyes," he prompted in the formal tongue. "Place your seal upon the crystal, then the alloy, invoking the unity of forms." Reyes paused, his dark eyes flicking to the altars. Virith tensed. Humans were notorious for their ritual blindness, their cultures a patchwork of forgotten barbarisms. The conservative faction leaned forward, Ardek's frills flaring subtly in anticipation of scandal. But Reyes did not falter. Instead, he inclined his head, a gesture too precise, too Thalari, and murmured something under his breath before speaking aloud. "With respect, Herald, the invocation sequences the alloy first for human custom, lest the rite echo the old Void Pact's reversal." His voice carried clear through the translator orb hovering at his collar, laced with a calm authority that prickled Virith's spines. He reached not for the crystal, but the alloy pedestal, pressing his palm to its sensor pad. A soft chime confirmed the seal. Then he turned seamlessly to the void crystal, completing the circuit. The herald blinked, his crest flattening in surprise, but the rite flowed unbroken. The nectar poured without spill, the holograms merging in flawless overlay. Gasps rippled from the lesser houses, even Ardek's mandibles stilled mid-click. How had the human known? The protocol variance was buried in sub-appendices of the treaty, a concession to human negotiators months prior, rarely invoked even among Thalari scholars. Virith's pulse quickened beneath her regal facade, a flicker of unease threading her composure. This was no bumbling attaché stumbling through motions. The man had scanned the rite's undercurrents in moments, adapting without fanfare. She quelled the thought. Humans were adaptable vermin, nothing more. And raised her scepter once more. The binding rite is sealed. The treaty stands ratified. Dismissed. As the court dispersed in a tide of whispering scales and rustling robes, Virith retreated to her private dais, her personal aide Lyra, gliding at her flank. The chamber's vast doors sealed with a hydraulic sigh, leaving only the echo of footsteps. "Majesty," Lyra ventured, her voice a silken murmur. "The human proves adequate for ceremony. Shall we assign him quarters in the outer wings as a purely symbolic presence? No need to entangle him further." Virith's gaze sharpened, pinning Lyra like a specimen. "No. Compile a confidential dossier on Jonah Reyes. Full access to Confederacy archives. Intercepted comms, service records. I will not house a shadow without knowing its shape." Lyra's frills quivered in hesitation, but Virith overrode it with a flick of her claw. He corrected the rite without prompting. Dismiss him as ceremonial at our peril." Lyra bowed and withdrew, her tail flicking unease. The wraith turned to the viewport, the palace spires piercing Talara Prime's bruised skies. The treaty had been forced upon her by the Void War's fallout, human fleets holding the line against the Krizari incursions when Thalari dreadnoughts faltered. But acceptance chafed. Her court saw it as dilution of divine bloodlines, and whispers of rebellion already slithered from conservative holds. The dais chamber's outer doors hissed open without summons. Ardek strode in, unbidden, his bulk clad in the obsidian-latticed robes of ancient office, flanked by 2 house enforcers whose crests bore the scars of old purges. "Empress," he rumbled, mandibles parting in a display that passed for deference among his kind. "The right may gleam, but the law fractures. Ancient statutes of the First Concordat, Article 17, Clause 9 forbid interspecies unions within the palace core. This consort defiles our rights." The Reth pivoted slowly, her spines erecting to full imperial flare. The chamber's air thickened with the acrid tang of challenge pheromones from Ardek's entourage. "You cite precedents twisted for your house's gain, Counselor. The treaty supersedes, ratified under emergency decree. Or do you propose we invite Krizari blades anew?" Ardek's eyes narrowed, multifaceted gleam catching the light. "Precedent endures, Majesty. The people murmur. The military prefects withhold full oaths until purity is restored. Petition the High Tribunal. Let them judge this human intrusion." The words landed like venom, laced with the old power plays. Ardek's motivation was clear: reclaim influence lost to her reforms, leveraging conservative fervor to unseat the alliance before it stabilized the succession. His flaw, rigid fealty to blood purity, blinded him to the galaxy's shifting tides, even as his cunning had preserved the court through purges. Vareth felt the crack in her propriety, a hot surge beneath the chill mask. Publicly, she must yield no ground. "Rise the challenge if you must, Counselor," she said evenly, her voice a glacial edge. "But the treaty binds until the tribunal speaks." "Enforcers," she snapped to the chamber guards, who materialized from alcoves. "Escort the chief counselor to his quarters, gently." Ardek bowed with exaggerated stiffness, retreating without retort, but his pheromones lingered like a promise of storms. Virith exhaled, spines retracting as solitude reclaimed the dais. The human lingered in her thoughts, his composure amid the rite's peril, the unassuming way he'd bridged protocols, ordinary for him perhaps, but here it unsettled the board. She activated her comm sphere, voice low. "Security Chief, double palace sentinels on all access corridors. Monitor for saboteurs, council factions, external agents, anyone probing the humans' movements." Discreetly, the chief's affirmation crackled back, efficient and loyal. Publicly, the treaty would stand unassailed, her pride demanding it. Privately, she'd watch this Jonah Reyes like a void serpent coiling in the dark. Let Ardek scheme, she'd turn the alliance's chains to her advantage. The palace halls would echo with their uneasy proximity now. A ritual bound 2 peoples, and her will set its terms. Yet as the first stars pierced the dusk beyond the viewport, Virith wondered at the human's steady gaze during the rite. Not defiance, but quiet certainty. A puzzle, demanding solving. She dismissed the aides with a gesture, alone with the weight of empire, resolve hardening like void crystal under pressure. The Concordat would not fracture, not while she breathed. Chief Counselor Ardek's voice sliced through the vaulted chamber like a vibro-knife, his frilled crest flaring in calculated outrage. "The treaty demands ceremonial parity, Empress. 60 days within the royal precincts, or the Concordat's word crumbles before the Confederacy's envoys." Birith's throne loomed at the chamber's apex, its obsidian facets catching the glow of holographic seals from a dozen conservative houses. She met his gaze without flinching, her own crest subtly arched in restraint. The council murmured assent, their bioluminescent markings pulsing in rhythmic approval. Prince Saloon, Ardek's shadow and all but title, leaned forward from his dais, his youthful spines quivering. "The human taints our sacred grounds. Succession rights falter under foreign eyes." The Wraith felt the weight of their stares, a lattice of expectation pressing against her resolve. She had anticipated this. Ardek's legal feints, Saloon's populist barbs, but the human's quiet certainty from the right lingered. An unwelcome splinter, denied, she intoned, her voice a cascade of imperial timbre. The residency proceeds as mandated. Security protocols adapt. The treaty holds. Ardek's spines retracted fractionally, a flicker of surprise in his slit-pupilled eyes, but he bowed with mechanical grace. The chamber emptied in eddies of whispering aides, leaving Vireth to summon her seneschal. Prepare the eastern wing. The envoy arrives at dawn. Jonah Reyev stepped through the precinct's arched gates as the first light bands ignited, his human frame unburdened by the gravelifters most off-worlders required. Thalari guards flanked him, their armored crests humming with restraint fields, but he offered only a nod, duffel slung over one shoulder. Vireth observed from the shadowed balcony, her private feeds relaying every step. Protocol demanded isolation, his quarters sealed, access tiered to observer status, but curiosity coiled beneath her duty. Who was this soft-skinned puzzle, bearing the galaxy's fragile alliance on shoulders that showed no strain? By midday, the palace's ancient ceremonial nexus faltered. Hollow emitters flickered in the Hall of Ancestors, their crystalline lattices, woven from void-mined shards older than the Concordat, emitting erratic pulses that disrupted the evening's lineage projection. Technicians swarmed, their tools whining against the relic's stubborn matrix. Vireth arrived amid the chaos, her presence parting the cluster like a grav wave. Report. Overload cascade, Majesty, the lead engineer rasped, spines limp with fatigue. The interface rejects modern calibrators. Writes halt until replacement from the forges. 3 cycles minimum. Murmurs rippled. The projection was no mere display but the Empire's living genealogy. Binding houses to her rule, Ardek would seize this fracture. Then Jonah appeared at the hall's edge. Summoned earlier for a perfunctory tour, he paused, scanning the stuttering array with unguarded interest. May I? The words emerged crisp through his translator cuff, no deference beyond courtesy. Vireth's guard tensed, but she signaled assent, masking her intrigue. Humans were clerks and diplomats, not artisans, yet his posture held the ease of one who mended more than treaties. He knelt before the nexus without ceremony, duffel discarded. From it came a compact multi-tool, human-forged, its alloys gleaming oddly against Thalari gleam steel. No scans, no rituals. His fingers danced across the lattice, tracing fault veins the technicians had mapped but ignored. Feedback loop here, he murmured, voice steady as he pried access panel. A secondary probe extended from his cuff, not standard envoy gear. Multitasking diagnostics while his free hand rerouted power threads with improvised splices from spare cabling in his pack. The engineers exchanged crests, flares of disbelief. Impossible, one hissed. The matrix bonds to neural imprints only. Jonah didn't pause, his brow furrowing in concentration, sweat beading despite the climate controls. A human trait, endurance without augmentation. He hummed faintly, a rhythmic undercurrent Vireth's audio picked up, syncing his adjustments to the crystal's harmonic whine. Pattern recognition, she realized later, connecting the Nexus's ancient resonance to principles aliens solved with rote algorithms. The emitter stabilized with a resonant chime, holograms blooming full, ancestral lineages spiraling in flawless azure light. Jonah rose, wiping his hands, expression mildly surprised at the applause from the stunned crew. Just a resonance bypass. Your crystals sing like old fusion coils. Bridge the frequencies, and they hold. He met Vireth's gaze directly, no boast, only the quiet certainty from the right. She felt a rare hesitation, her crest twitching involuntarily. Limit his access? Protocol screamed yes, confine the human to gilded isolation. But the repair lingered, efficient beyond their protocols, born of improvisation no Thalari rite encouraged. Expanded permissions, she commanded privately to her seneschal via Neuralink, pending the dossier's full analysis. Tier 3 clearance, archives and auxiliary systems. The aide's confirmation pinged silently. Vireth turned to Jonah. Your aid proves useful. Diplomatic updates commence tomorrow. Closed briefings. His nod was simple, eyes crinkling in what humans called a smile, warmth without presumption. Happy to contribute, Empress. As guards escorted him to quarters now unlocked to the precinct's veins, Vireth lingered by the nexus, its glow steady. Competence beyond protocol. A threat? Or the alloy her fracturing empire needed? The storm broke at vespers in the grand atrium, where holographic feeds broadcast to every house terminal. Prince Solon strode the central dais unbidden, his spines fully erect, voice amplified for the Empire. The Empress risks our bloodline. Entertaining this foreign consort in sacred precincts invites dilution. Succession tainted by alien whims. Cheers erupted from conservative feeds, Ardek's silhouette visible in the shadowed galleries, his manipulation plain. Tension crackled, public channels flared with accusations, houses polarizing as the broadcast looped. Virith entered like a solar flare, her honor guards' fields humming lethality. The atrium hushed, bioluminescence dimming in deference or fear. Saloon whirled, spines quivering, majesty. The people demand. Silence, she thundered, her voice a seismic command that buckled knees. Projection fields ignited around her, displaying the treaty's seals, the Nexus's restored glory, even Jonah's unobtrusive repair time-stamped for verification. You presume to lecture on risk, Prince, while you inflame division for personal gain? Saloon paled, his crest collapsing, but Virith pressed. The residency stands, Titan palace security, double perimeter fields, neural sweeps on all entrants. No fractures under my watch. Ardek emerged then, bowing low. Wise, Empress, yet caution with the human. Caution serves, she cut him, eyes locking his. As does resolve. The broadcast captured her unyielding poise, feeds shifting to murmurs of approval from neutral houses. Solon retreated amid jeers, his gambit blunted. Lirith dismissed the assembly with a gesture, but her mind raced. Close quarters now inevitable, Jonah's quarters mere spans from her strategy vault. Competence would surface, unbidden, in these confined orbits. That night, as aides scheduled the first briefing, framed as diplomatic updates, veiling strategic depths, Virith reviewed the incoming dossier on her private holoslate, human logistics feats in fringe wars, unassuming profiles masking tactical weaves, no arrogance in the records, only results. Her crest relaxed fractionally. Proximity bred not just risk but revelation. The human's restraint matched her control, a dance commencing, empires hanging in balance. Jonah, in his Spartan quarters, unpacked methodically, already sketching interface mods on a personal pad. The palace hummed around him, alive with secrets. He felt the weight of eyes, but pressed on, work to do, alliance to forge. Virith watched one feed linger on his form, then severed it. Puzzle indeed, but hers to solve. As the precinct sealed under heightened watch, stars wheeled beyond armored viewports. 60 days. Competence into the open. Her control, tested by his calculated calm. Chief Counselor Ardek's crest flared crimson as he rose in the vaulted chamber, his voice slicing through the hum of holographic projections like a vibroblade. Empress Vireth Nal, the Treaty of Concord binds us to this liaison. But privileges granted in haste demand review. I move the Council probe Jonah Reyes's access to our strategic precincts. Effective immediately. Vireth's throne hummed faintly beneath her, its neural links pulsing with the chamber's tension. She felt the weight of 24 counselors' gazes, their pheromonal signatures thickening the air with dissent. Ardek's gambit was no surprise. The conservative houses chafed at every concession to the human treaty. Yet yielding now would fracture her fragile hold on the moderates. She inclined her head, mandibles clicking once in measured denial. The motion is noted, Counselor, but the humans' recent audit of the core precinct, sealing a vulnerability before it bled resources, speaks for itself. Privileges stand. Redirect your zeal to the borders, where smugglers gnaw at our flanks. Murmurs rippled, crests flickering in unease, but Ardek subsided with a bow that barely masked his gleam. Vireth dismissed the session with a gesture, her mind already turning outward. Jonah Reyes had proven steady in the precinct's sterile confines, his questions probing without presumption, but the frontiers demanded more than protocol. If Ardek sought to unseat him through scrutiny, let the human face the real test, under her watch. By midday, her orders dispatched Jonah to lead a routine inspection of the HFY War border forts, with a covert observation feed routed to her private station. Protocol forbade such personal oversight of a liaison, but curiosity, reluctant, insistent, overrode it. She settled into the dim-lit orbiter above the sector, armored viewports framing the jagged spires of Thalari outposts against the nebula's glow. Screens bloomed with feeds. Jonah's shuttle descending, his team of 6 Thalari engineers fanning out under his quiet direction. He moved with unhurried purpose, carapace light frame dwarfed by the towering bastions yet commanding without volume. "Patterns here," Jonah said over the open channel, his translator rendering the words with crisp formality. Vareth leaned closer, antennae twitching. He traced a holographic map with one hand while directing a drone scan with the other, multitasking as if breathing. Smugglers aren't breaching walls, they're tunneling micro-rifts in the substrata. See the residue echoes? Low-grade phase emitters, scavenged from derelict haulers. Her engineers hesitated, exchanging pheromonal bursts of confusion. Thalari doctrine relied on layered shields and patrols. Such subtle erosion was rote monitored by automata, but Jonah didn't lecture. He knelt, sampling the faint ion scars himself, then rigged a feedback loop from spare sensor buoys, nothing requisitioned, just field scraps. Bounce the buoy's pulses off the strata harmonics. It'll cascade the rifts shut without draining power reserves. His voice stayed even, optimistic, as if failure wasn't in the equation. Vireth's primary engineer Lirvek vented doubt scent. Human, that risks harmonic overload. Calculated it on the descent. Overload peaks at 0.3%. Self-corrects. Jonah activated the array. The ground trembled faintly. Holographic readouts flared green as micro-rifts collapsed in a chain reaction. Smugglers' hidden caches imploding silently. Cheers erupted from his team, crests blooming in startled azure. Lirvek's signal spiked with awe pheromones. Our sims projected weeks for such precision. She watched Jonah shrug, wiping dust from his hands. Just connecting dots. Your strata scans gave the key frequencies. Better resolution than our human gear. No boast, only partnership. Vireth's mandibles parted slightly, a private concession stirring. Humans juggled variables like Thalari wove silk, effortless, adaptive. She'd dismissed them as fragile diplomats. This was strategy, honed quiet. The feed held her through the hours, protocol forgotten. Jonah rotated his team seamlessly, pushing endurance without command. Humans, it seemed, thrived on sustained rhythm where Thalari mandated rest cycles. He bantered lightly with Lirvek, decoding a cultural jest about soft-shelled persistence, drawing startled laughter. Pack bonding, she noted, threading respect into ranks. Then alarms shrieked. Militant signatures, anti-alliance radicals, Ardek shadows no doubt, swarmed from concealed dropships, plasma lances igniting the dusk. Ambush, Lirvek barked, his squad scrambling into defensive webs. Jonah dropped low, eyes scanning patterns amid chaos, militants flanking via the very rifts they'd exploited. Vireth's station erupted in alerts. Her claw slammed the authorization panel. Reyes, you have frontier coordination. Royal Guard contingent deploys now. Hold the line. Trust under fire. She'd test it. Acknowledged, Empress. Jonah's calm pierced the static, already directing. Lirvek, seal the east web. Your lances outrange theirs. Engineers repurposed those buoys for EMP bursts. Hit their dropship nacelles. He moved among them, not leading from rear but sharing fire slots, his sidearm barking precise suppression while he multitasked comms to her guard inbound. Militants pressed, bolts scorching carapace and stone. A Thalari fell, chitin cracking. Jonah dragged him to cover without pause, binding wounds mid-dodge, resilience incarnate, psychological steel amid the fray. Vareth's guard arrived like thunder, iridescent blades whirling, but it was Jonah's improvisation that turned the tide. Boy EMPs crippled 2 dropships, forcing the rest to scatter as Lirvek's lances picked off stragglers. The skirmish broke in minutes. Militants routed. Jonah knelt by the wounded, his voice steadying pheromonal panic. We've got this. Empress's guard inbound with medevac. Lirvek clasped his shoulder. Unprecedented contact, crest fully bloomed in reverence. You saw the nacelles' weak phase locks before our scans. How? Pattern from the smuggler's emitters. Same tech family. Jonah rose, meeting the feed's implied gaze. Team effort, though. Your lances sealed it. Vireth exhaled, her station's air recyclers whirring against the heat in her core. Assumptions shifted, subtle as strata settling. Our deck's probe would falter against this. Jonah Reyes wasn't ornament. He was alloy. Strengthening her rule. Royal shuttles descended, guards fanning out to secure. She keyed private comms. Well-coordinated liaison. Return under escort. The Council will hear of this. Copy, Empress. Borders hold. His tone carried no triumph, only quiet resolve. As the precincts below locked under dual watch, Thalari might and human cunning entwined, Virith gazed at wheeling stars. 60 days dwindled, competence no longer veiled. Her alliance forged sharper in fire. Out at the border, ingenuity and power had collided, and in that crucible, a ruler glimpsed equals. Crystal flutes chimed like fracturing ice as Vireth Nell raised her glass in the grand rotunda, the gala's swirl of silks and scales a glittering veil over coiled tensions. Laughter from the outer clusters masked the low thrum of concealed scanners, but her gaze snagged on a server weaving too close to Counselor Ardek's cluster. A human auxiliary, face obscured by a service cowl, hand dipping toward a jeweled brooch at his belt. The air thickened, her crest flared instinctively. "Secure the perimeter," she murmured to her shadow guard. Voice a silken blade pitched below the orchestra's swell. But the figure lunged, not at Ardek, but toward the central dais where Senior Aide Lyrath stood expounding on border yields, brooch glinting as it unfolded into a dispersal nozzle. Venom mist primed to engulf the platform. Chaos erupted in heartbeats. Thalari nobles recoiled, tails lashing, as Jonah Reyes, her consort by treaty's cruel ink, barreled from the periphery. He had been lingering at the human delegation's fringe, murmuring protocols to a sub-envoy, but now he vaulted a refreshment plinth, shoulder-checking a frozen attendant. No cry of alarm, no fumbling draw of a sidearm. Instead, he snatched a half-drained decanter mid-stride, hurling its viscous contents, a tart, adhesive nectar from Krellian vines, square into the assassin's cowl. The mist nozzle sputtered, clogged mid-release by the syrupy flood. The server staggered, clawing at his face, but Jonah was upon him, twisting the brooch arm behind the intruder's back with a fluid lock that spoke of shadowed training halls, not diplomatic halls. A knee drove into the assassin's spine. The device clattered free, its casing cracking open to reveal nested charges, enough to breach the dais shielding and claim a dozen lives, including her own. Guards swarmed, pinning the writhing form. Vireth's pulse thundered beneath her regal poise, crest rigid as she descended the dais steps. "Contain and isolate," she commanded, eyes locking on Jonah as he rose, breathing steady, sleeves damp with nectar but stance unbowed. Lyrath coughed, waving off medics, his scales paling at the near miss. The rotunda fell to stunned murmurs. Then silence as Ardek pushed forward, his frilled mane quivering. "Empress, this outrage demands." "Demands counsel, counselor," Virith cut in, voice honed to imperial frost. "Convene emergency session, now." She signaled, the chamber sealed, force fields humming to life across the exits. Jonah knelt briefly, retrieving the device's remnants. Wires, vials, a data crystal pulsing faint code. His fingers deftly photographing each fragment with a concealed wrist implant before handing them to her guard intact. In the shadowed annex off the council vault, stone walls etched with ancestral edicts, Virith presided over the emergency conclave. The gala's finery shed like molted skin. Ardek flanked her left, his eyes darting to the secured assassin slumped in containment field, while Lyrith nursed a bruised mandible. Jonah stood at the chamber's edge, uninvited yet unchallenged, his presence a quiet anchor amid the Thalari fury. "Interrogate," Virith ordered the Inquisitor drones hovering like jeweled wasps, full neural probe, and commission a loyalty sweep. Every courtier, every auxiliary from the gala roster. No exemptions. The drones hummed assent, swarming the captive as his screams echoed faintly through dampeners. Ardek leaned in, voice a gravel rasp. "This reeks of border dissidents, Empress." "Human rabble, perhaps, testing our vigilance post-treaty." "Or fissures within," Virith replied, her gaze sweeping the holographic feeds now blooming across the central hololith, security sweeps revealing tampered access logs in the service wings. She turned to Jonah, the decision crystallizing unbidden. "Consor Reyes, your assessment on court security. Speak." Head snapped toward him, Ardek's frills flattening in disdain. But Jonah stepped forward without flourish, eyes tracing the hololith's data streams. The device was Thalari make, modified with off-world triggers. Clog was luck, but the nested failsafes suggest insider relay, Someone fed real-time positions. He tapped a flickering node. Gala manifests show 3 unvetted auxiliaries routed through eastern docks. Cross-reference with palace ingress logs. Patterns emerge in shift overlaps. Multitask the sweeps. Drones on biometrics. Humans on behavioral anomalies. We spot tells your scans miss. Like micro-gestures in crowds. Lirith's tail tip twitched in surprise. Humans read such subtleties? Our augments. Augments assume intent, Jonah said mildly. No boast in his tone. We read adaptation. Permission to coordinate the auxiliary teams? Virith nodded, the weight of his counsel settling like a new mantle. Granted. Formal. Ardek stiffened, but she quelled him with a glance. Propriety cracked, yes, but strength demanded evolution. Hours blurred in the vault's glow, drones extracting confessions in jagged bursts. The assassin shattered first, a low-house operative, paid in untraceable script, but his neural map yielded more, a comm link to a shadowed account tied to Prince Solin's retainers. Virith's crest iced as the hololith resolved the link. Encrypted missives, resource diversions masked as succession preparations. Soloon, Ardek breathed, mane drooping, air presumptive. This will ignite the houses, public riots, council schism. Tradition binds us to overlook kinfishers for stability. The chamber tensed, eyes on her, Prince Soloon, her late consort's brother, ambitious shadow to the throne, whose conservative block echoed Ardek's purism. Evidence chained him, timing synced to the gala's peak, motives rooted in blocking the human alliance that diluted Thalari bloodlines. A succession crisis loomed, factions primed to fracture the Concordat. Virith rose, voice steel over silk. Suspend Prince Solin's privileges. Full sequestration pending legal tribunal. No appeals to tradition. Law is our spine. Gasps rippled. Ardek's claws scraped stone, but she pressed on. Broadcast the evidence chains. Let the public witness reckoning, not rumor. Stability through truth, not appeasement. Jonah met her gaze across the hololith, a flicker of approval in his steady eyes. No triumph, just shared resolve. Lirath nodded slowly, scales regaining luster. Bold, Empress. It exposes us, but binds us tighter. As the council dispersed to enact her decrees, drones fanning to Soloon's spires, announcements threading the palace nets, Virith lingered with Jonah amid dying hollows. You turned venom to verdict, she said quietly, formality thinning. Not with force, but foresight. He shrugged, humble as ever. Team effort. Your law holds the line. We just spot the cracks. Yet in his calm dissection of the gala's fractures, juggling feeds, logs, faces, she glimpsed the galaxy's like breath. Humans, threading crises like breath. Ardek paused at the vault door, turning with veiled barbs. Human cunning aids, Empress. But Sulun's fall invites vipers. Tradition evolves, Virith interjected, crest-flaring command, dismissed. Alone with Jonah, she traced the data crystal scars. Fissures exposed, alliance tempered. 60 days to borders. Now, throne room trials loomed sharper. Outside, the palace stirred under lockdown. Thalari blades and human eyes entwined once more. Soloon's sequestration feeds crackled live, retainers scattering, but Jonah's patterns already netting 2 mid-flight, competence unveiled, suspicions forged to steel. Her rule, no longer solitary. The Erethnale's throne chamber thrummed with the low chime of an incoming decree, its holographic seal blooming crimson across the obsidian table. The ancient tribunal of purity, their sigil unchallenged for 5 centuries. Chief Counselor Ardek stood at its edge, his frilled crest flaring in feigned neutrality as he intoned, Empress, the tribunal declares the treaty void. Human blood dilutes the divine line. Succession statutes demand purity untainted. The Concordat teeters on constitutional fracture. She did not rise, her armored pauldrons casting long shadows in the chamber's vaulted glow. Outside, the palace lockdown held firm. Jonah Reyes' quiet vigilance had already ensnared 2 fleeing retainers via the Soloon feeds, their confessions pending. Competence unveiled. But this was no mere intrigue. It was the old houses striking at her core. Ardek's hand subtle in the weave. Virith's gaze pinned him. The tribunal presumes to unmake my word, transmit my response. They convene under my auspices, or not at all. Ardek's mandibles clicked softly, a flicker of satisfaction veiled as duty. As you command, Radiance, yet the feeds ignite. District's murmur of crisis. Let them murmur. Virith dismissed him with a gesture, her mind already turning to the human at her side. Jonah stood unobtrusive by the strategy hololith, his fingers tracing data streams from the lockdown feeds, eyes calm as if plotting a supply route, not a coup's remnants. She had seen his kind dismissed as soft-shelled ephemerals, yet here he stood, threading patterns she had overlooked until now. Jonah Reyes, she said, voice level as polished stone. The tribunal wields antiquity as a blade. Your Confederacy's treaties, do they bend to such relics? He met her gaze without flinching, his posture impeccable in the Thalari envoy silks that hung loose on his frame. They adapt, Empress. Precedent evolves with necessity. If I may. At her nod, he summoned a fresh hollow sheet, his hands moving with the steady rhythm of one who had orchestrated logistics across void storms. Words flowed from him not in lecture, but in layered script. A memorandum fusing Thalari purity clauses with human relational law, precedents from the Orion Accords where alliances superseded bloodlines through mutual covenant, cases where merit had trumped dissent in wartime exigency. Vireth leaned forward, her crest subtly rising as she scanned the draft. It was no rote recitation. Jonah connected disparate threads, human contract theory's emphasis on intent over form, married to her people's ritual oaths, a novel hybrid, elegant in its audacity. This counters their procedural voiding, she murmured, tracing a clause. You learned our law in weeks? Enough to see the gaps, Your Radiance. His tone held no boast, only the quiet assurance of a man who multitasked crises as breath. Humans argue from patterns across systems. Your statutes echo our own Federation charters. Flexible spines for growing empires. Ardek lingered at the chamber's arch, his eyes narrowing on the display. Virith felt the weight of his scrutiny but pressed on. Summon the legal scholars. Kethra, Lirvan. Full review by dawn. Amendments permitted. Modernize the succession glosses where they align. Her voice carried the snap of command. Propriety intact, yet a crack formed in the formality as she turned back to Jonah. You have given me a shield. Walk with me. She delayed the public audience without announcement, guiding him through the palace's veiled corridors to her private sanctum, a vault of crystal archives where succession tomes hummed in stasis fields. The air hummed cooler here, scented with ionized stone. Vireth sealed the doors, her guards posted beyond. The tribunal strikes at my airless line. If the treaty falls, so does stability. Councils fracture, borders bleed. Speak plainly, Jonah. What does your memorandum imply for us? He paused, reading her not with alien bluntness, but a subtle empathy that pierced her reserve, eyes noting the tension in her frilled crest, the way her claws tapped once, betraying isolation's toll. Not dilution, but reinforcement. Thalari strength and ritual lineage, human in adaptive bonds. Together we redefine succession. Merit oaths binding consort to crown, ratified by council vote. Your people respect earned fealty. Mine build empires on it. Vireth paced, the hololith projecting branching futures. Riots if the suit prevailed. Unity if countered. His words resonated, not as foreign imposition, but as a mirror to her own unvoiced hopes. She had dismissed humans as fleeting diplomats, yet Jonah juggled her law's intricacies while cross-referencing lockdown patterns, his mind a nexus of simultaneous threads. You see connections we ritualize, she admitted, formality softening to alliance's edge. Ardek would call it heresy. But preservation demands evolution. Their discourse deepened, strategies unfolding, succession not as blood purity, but covenant resilience. Jonah sketched contingencies, human mediation protocols to preempt council revolts, Thalari rights adapted for joint oversight, mutual, this exchange. She taught him the subtle crest speak of court dissent. He revealed psychological reads on Ardek's feigned loyalty. Hours blurred, their partnership no longer ceremonial, but steel-forged. Dawn's feeds shattered the sanctum's hush. Ardek's leak erupted across Saloon's districts. Falsified documents, holographic forgeries depicting Jonah conspiring with border empires, whispering human treachery to shatter the treaty. Riots ignited, conservative enclaves in the forged districts hurling plasma at enforcers, crowds chanting purity unbound. Feeds showed flames licking spires, militias clashing with frenzied mobs. Virith's claws dug into the console, rage a controlled blaze. Ardek's gambit, internal antagonist unmasked in desperation. He overreaches. She activated Palace Command. Deploy the First Blade Militia. Full cordons on key districts. Lethal force authorized only on escalation. And Jonah. Her voice steadied, eyes locking on his. Competence met crisis. She would not let the tribunal's pawns claim him. Before the chamber feeds, with scholars' endorsements scrolling live, she declared, Jonah Reyes, liaison of the Human Confederacy, is hereby appointed official advisor on succession policy. His memorandum stands as crown proposal. Dissenters, prove your purity in council, not streets. The palace stirred anew, militia thunder rolling through corridors. Jonah nodded, already partitioning riot grids on his personal slate, patterning mob flows against militia vectors, multitasking feeds with succession clauses. We'll hold the line, Empress, together. Ardek's transmission arrived laced with protest. Radiance. This elevates the outsider amid chaos. Chaos you fanned, counselor. Virith cut the link, her crest flaring triumph. Outside, blades gleamed under lockdown skies. Human insight entwining Thalari steel. Law bent, rumors scorched. Riots quelled. Her rule endured, alliances revised in preservation's fire. Jonah's gaze met hers across the hololith. A quiet bond. Respect earned in crisis's forge. No longer solitary, they faced the Concordat's dawn. Virith's claws tightened on the hololith's edge as the alert pierced the command vault like a dagger. Blockade confirmed, Majesty, intoned Fleet Admiral Kresh, her frills quivering. Coalition dreadnoughts from the Vexari Enclave and Drathul Dominion seal the outer corridors, embargo lines drawn. Core worlds starve in cycles if unbroken. The chamber's air thickened with the acrid tang of ionized panic. Beyond the viewport, the Concordat's glittering trade spines flickered, supply haulers frozen mid-drift as enforcer beams locked them in stasis. Internal riots quelled, only for rival empires to strike. Ardek's whispers no doubt fueling their audacity. Options, Admiral? Kresh's mandibles clicked. Conventional breach. 3 squadrons sacrificed to punch the line. Attrition favors them. Jonah Reyes stood at her side, his human frame unbowed amid the Thalari officer's subtle flinches. No crest, no frills, yet his eyes scanned the projections with a predator's focus, fingers tracing ghost paths over unlit controls. Asymmetric, he said quietly, voice steady as hull plating. Not a hammer, a net. Virith turned, her gaze locking his. The human had quelled her quartz fractures with words and webs of insight. Now this. Elaborate, envoy. He didn't hesitate, pulling auxiliary feeds with multitasking ease. Supply manifests, diplomatic channels, even Vexari patrol rhythms syncing across 3 hollows. Diplomacy threads the needle, ping neutral haulers from fringe clans, offer escorted runs under Concordat colors. Logistical feint, reroute decoy freighters through nebula drifts, draw patrols thin. Humans call it swarm and sting. Small strikes on resupply nodes while main forces ghost the gaps. Officers murmured, frills rippling doubt. Kresh leaned in. Risky. Vexari sensors pierce nebulae. Drathul enforcers adapt. Jonah nodded, humble acknowledgement in the tilt of his head. True, but pattern here. His finger linked unrelated feeds. Vexari fuel depots lagging, Drathul crew rotations predictable. They overextend, expecting our frontal rage. We adapt faster, multitask the chaos. Virith felt the shift, a crack in her regal shell. This alien saw connections her tacticians wrote memorized past. Implement. Admiral, detach scouts for the feints. Envoy Reyes coordinates diplomacy. Cycles blurred into relentless push. Jonah endured without falter, commanding holocaufs with fringe envoys in one breath. Recalibrating drone swarms in the next. His human resilience a quiet storm. Thalari aides flagged first, frills drooping from strain. He pressed on, optimism woven into every correction. We've got this, he'd say. forging bonds with a shared ration pod or a nod across species divides. Virith watched, crest subtly warming, his humility disarmed where bluster would repel. Then sabotage struck. Alarms wailed as Royal Cruiser Thalvir vented atmosphere, engines sabotaged mid-faint. "Our deck's tendrils," Virith snarled, linking to the bridge. Hollow showed crew scrambling, but the ship listed toward a patrol kill zone. "Improvisation," Jonah breathed, already at all consoles. No panic, his mind juggled. Reroute power from shields to impulse, vent cargo as decoy flares, signal nearby scouts for tractor link-up. "Captain, sequence this. Purge bays 3 through 7. Ignite residuals for chaff burst. I'll slave drones to mask your signature." The Thalary captain hesitated, frills flat. "Human protocols untested." "Do it," Virith commanded, her voice steel over the link. She synchronized from the vault. Thalari precision meshing his creativity. The Thalvir shuddered, cargo blooming into a nebula of false signatures. Patrols veered, scouts latched on, hauling the wounded cruiser clear. Cheers rippled through the vault, amazement cresting Kresh's features. Impossible. He foresaw the cascade. Virith met Jonah's gaze, respect a live wire between them. Internal foes lingered, external noose tightening. This demanded more. Joint command envoy. Full authority shared. We strike together. His eyes widened fractionally, but he bowed. Formal, unflinching. Honored Empress, synchronized counter. Your fleet's pin, my maneuver's flank. She led the van from Empyrean spear, Jonah's voice threading her comms like a second heartbeat. Valari lances pierced the line's heart, disciplined fury. Human ingenuity unraveled the flanks, diplomatic bribes flipping a fringe squadron, logistical traps starving dreadnought guns. Vireth's claws gripped her throne as a Vexari behemoth buckled under improvised mine layers. Jonah's voice calm. Supply corridor alpha reopening, haulers inbound. Endurance defined him. Cycles without respite, adapting to Thalari interfaces mid-firefight, his pattern recognition linking Drotha leak points to ancient human siege lore. Her officers whispered awe. He endures like void itself, frills erect in newfound regard. Virith felt it too, propriety fracturing into alliance's warmth. They were equals in the forge. The blockade shattered at dawn cycle, coalition remnants fleeing as Concordat spines blazed free. Supply floods reversed the starve. Cheers echoed from core worlds. Council chambers gleamed under investiture lights. Ardex mandibles tight as hollows replayed triumphs. The envoy's maneuvers saved fleets, Kresh declared. Ratify elevation. Joint Commandant Reyes, with wartime writ. Our deck rose, voice oily. Tradition endures because we adapt. Vireth cut, crest dominant. Votes cascaded. Ratification sealed. Public feeds broadcast the scene. Crowds in Capitol spires roaring as Jonah stood beside her, humble amid glory. Vireth stepped forward, voice carrying galaxy-wide. People of the Concordat, behold Jonah Reyes, not envoy, but consort. Delegated wartime authority, partner in rule. His insight entwines our steel. Together we prevail. Ardek bowed, defeated gleam in his eyes. Courtiers' frills bowed low. Unity forged. Jonah's hand brushed hers in the throng, brief, electric, no words. The bond spoke. She was born to rule, and learned that true power is finding an equal.